Hello everyone, it is TestRender here, and this video is about post-processing or post-work for a render. And I know, I'm kind of skipping the rendering part completely here, but this is too good of an opportunity to speak about post, so I'm just going to jump there and figure out the rendering part at some point later. So, as you already probably noticed, this is not actually my render, this is by TritiumCG from DeviantArt. We made this exchange thing where I sent him one of my renders, raw renders, and he sent me this, one of his raw renders. This is one of his original characters, Ilaria. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's my version. Sorry guys. And this particular image, I think, was called Strawberry Chocolate Glamour, and you can find it in his DeviantArt page. And if you're not watching him in DeviantArt, go watch him. Okay, so I want to do some post work for this, and one thing that Tritium mentioned was that he was kind of semi-sorry for sending me this 8-bit PNG, but there's really nothing to be sorry about. This is pretty typical output from DAZ Studio or any other rendering software, iRay or Octane or whatever. It's pretty okay, and if I look at the histogram here, you can see that there's only a little bit black here. That is this dead pitch black. It's there's still information in most of the dark areas. There's not too much bright areas, but then there's a little bit of this burnt white. You can see a small amount of it over there. So most of the pixels are in the center area, which means that there is more information than just being completely black or completely white. And that is a good thing. We can expand that and we can work with that. We can make it brighter and give it more contrast and so on. And that is the first thing actually I want to do. And to give myself a little bit more wiggle room for this post-processing work, I'm going to change the image precision to 32-bit floating point. Whatever is available for you depends on the software you're using. I'm using Gimp, and the latest version of Gimp seems to eat this 32-bit floating point and other interesting formats pretty okay. So the next thing I want to do is I want to duplicate the layer a couple of times. Always work on a copy. Never start to mess with the layer that you first brought in, and just make a copy of it and go forward. So with that, so you have something you can come back to when I want to say when something goes wrong, because usually there's some adjustments you just can't take back, so it's easier to delete the layer and create a new one and try again. So by creating copies of the layer, I'm giving myself that option. Okay, I'm gonna turn off the topmost layer and work with the middle one a little bit. I want to change the mode of it, the screen. There are the blending mode. You can find it on pretty much any image manipulation softwares, and there are some options, but there are these classic ones like lighten only screen, addition, multiply burn, overlay, soft light, and so on. There are many options, and what screen does, it uses the layer to kind of light up the layer below, and the effect is quite dramatic. Maybe we can drop that to about 60%. It's always good idea to overshoot a little with your adjustments and then take it back and reveal the original a little bit from the below in your layer stack. So the next one, let's do some curves for it. So I'm going to colors, curves, and I'm pretty sure one thing that I really like about this Gimp curve tool is that you can see the histogram here in the below, so I know quite. So it's kind of easy to figure out what part of the spectrum I'm working on when I'm changing things. I don't want to make the blacks too gray, so I'm leaving the black there, same as the whites. They can stay bright white. I'm not going to touch them. I'm going to work with these lower midtones. I'm going to just bring them up a little bit to make the image brighter. One area that I'm slightly worried about is this here, right behind the hair. The light comes from the left side and it's quite blue light, but the hair is making this very intense shadow in the upper portion of the back. So that's something that I kind of want to make sure that I actually can see the skin, that this doesn't go to pitch black in any situation. So maybe a little bit further there. I'm going to overshoot these two. I'm going to make this way too much brighter than I really want, and then I'm going to just drop the layer opacity to make it appear. Maybe I'm going to even lift the blacks a little bit so I get some texture in the black fabrics. Okay, let's drop the opacity to maybe somewhere around 60. Okay. So there you have it. So that's pretty much the basic brightness or the value of the image that I want to adjust. I have this list in my head on things that I want to make sure I do. The first thing is to figure out the basic value of the image. And if we look at the histogram, it was here pretty much piled up here in the dark corner, but it's now spread it out to further up in to the brighter areas. The background changed quite drastically. It's no longer this beautiful bluey purpley thing, but I'm not going to worry about it because it seems to me that this is some kind of virtual reality background, so it can look like anything. I don't have to really worry about that. So what I'm concentrating on is the skin tones and the main figure in the picture. Okay, next I'm going to right click here in the layer stack and select new from visible. So what that does, it basically flattens out all the layers together and creates a copy of that on top. So I now have everything below here merged to one layer above it. I'm going to duplicate that, and so I have something I can go back to. And the next thing I'm going to use this warp transformation tool that Gimp nicely provides. And there's a trick to this. The default settings are not very usable, I think. So what you want to do is to put the spacing to 1. So it doesn't make these serrated edges when you move stuff. So this is, if you don't know what to do with this is something that you can move pixels around, like warp them in a way in the picture. And you can correct a lot of little mistakes with this one. And the other setting you want to do, so spacing to 1, so it doesn't leave serrated edges, and interpolation to no halo, so it doesn't blur out the pixels as you go. Pretty much, I think the normal setting or the default setting is cubic, and that pretty much destroys the fine detail as it goes, so go with no halo and that should be okay. Rest of it is pretty much up to you. The size, I'm going to change that a lot. Hardness, I have it very, very soft. Strength is pretty low, so it doesn't do much, so I kind of can move my mouse pretty much and make a lot of changes, and or move my mouse a lot and it doesn't change too much of things. So then there's this little drop down menu here, and I'm going to shrink area, and I'm going to work with the breast here, and I'm not going to try to make the breast smaller, but I want to make this fishnet pattern here a little bit less stretchy. So I'm just going to click around with this shrink area tool to make it appear a little bit less stretched out. Something like that. Now I created an error in the background there, so I'm going to use this erase warping and very small brush to get rid of that error. On the areas I didn't want to change. Like so. Then I'm going to approve my changes by pressing enter. And there it is. I've now made some changes to the image. The breast is a little bit smaller, but the difference is barely noticeable, at least in my opinion. Well, I'm going to push and move around stuff here and let it play, and you can just enjoy the music and watch. Okay, here we are after that. So if we look at the original and then turn on my changes, you can see I changed a little bit the fabric and how it goes over the skin. One problem that I always have, and which is also pretty obvious here, is that sometimes the clothing items they follow a little bit too tightly the shape of the body. With in Dust Studio, so they kind of it would be logical the clothing to go straight over this spine area here, same as here, and not kind of sink in there, and it's something I always end up changing here because it's really difficult and time consuming to make that change in the studio, but it's like 5 minutes in Gimp to fix it. So there is perfectly good things that you can go on and fix it in the mix, so to speak, or fix it in post, and this is one of them. Like, it's really not worth the time and trouble to try to make that work in Gimp or in DAS, when you can just easily fix it with Photoshop or Gimp, and it's not a big trouble. So if there's one thing here that you can kind of pick up and start using, maybe it's this. Same as here and here and there. These kind of clothing items, they tend to kind of sink a little bit into this soft tissue of a humanoid character in real life. Like, if you see a picture of a person on a beach with some kind of swimwear on, you can be sure that the swimwear, at least partially, kind of deforms a little bit of the soft tissue of the human body. So that's what I've been trying to do here. I've made these little divots here and bumped up the surrounding areas a little bit to make it look like if the strap here is deforming the soft tissue a little bit. Maybe something like that. Okay, next I think I want to figure out the coloring a little bit, and for that I think it is a good idea to duplicate the layer once again, and I'm going to go to colors and color balance and start with highlights. This light that's in the image that comes from the left side pretty much is a little bit cold and bluey, so I'm going to enhance that by turning the color of that to cyan blue and maybe a little bit green to it too. Something like that. And then shadows, I'm going to go for red and orangey, and as you can see, that mostly affects on the character in the image, because that is the darkest area, so it counts that as shadows. So I can pretty much set the skin tone here. And I know I've checked the other images of this character that she has actually very, very red hair. So I think I'm going to have to figure something for that separately, but at this point I want to kind of set the skin tone. And one interesting thing about the skin tone is that it has a little green to it always. So adding a little bit of green makes it makes it look better. Like if I zero the green out, it looks very red, but if I bring it up just a little bit, maybe something like that, it suddenly starts to look like a living thing. Yeah. So it kind of takes away the magenta, dark magenta shades from the shadows. So that works. Let's see what the midtones do. I think there's this one little mountain here in the middle that is pretty much the background color that I'm hoping I can change with this. So let's see if I crank it up to blue. Yeah, that's where it mostly affects. It changes a little bit the skin tones, but mostly on the highlighted areas, because like this highlight here in the arm, for example, it's pretty mid-gray in value, so it works there. But maybe 11 is too much. Let's try 5. And then maybe a little bit cyan in the mix too. So that changes, that kind of brings back the coloring of the background a little bit. But I think I want to go to this cyany thing here. So okay, let's keep that and let's compare to the previous one. It's almost pink in the previous version, so now it has this blue tint to it that is more, I think, that what was the idea here. Okay, next the hair. I'm going to just lasso it and we'll see what I can come up with next. So, and I'm not going to be too accurate about my lasso. Like there's really no reason to be, because, well, you'll see. Okay, let's go with that. So I'm going to press enter to approve my lasso and then shift Q to turn it into a quick mask. And now I can use brushes and make new selections here and change things, but I think only a little bit of blur would go a long way here, so maybe something like that. So it's a soft edge selection when I again press shift Q to turn it back to a selection. So now, okay, just in case, let's make a duplicate of the layer and let's see how the hair color changes. I think I'm going to go with hue and saturation and focus on red and bring up the saturation way up. Same for the magenta, I think. And for the yellow, maybe. And then for the master, let's do that also. Oh yeah, that works. That makes it pop out a little bit more. And Control Shift A to deselect everything. So there it is. What next? I think I'm going to do a somewhat similar trick for the lips. It's not necessary, but this is something that I do pretty much for all of my own renders too. I fix little areas of skin like this just a little bit, so Shift Q and blur it out. And let's see. I think I only need to bring up the saturation a little bit here. Maybe drop the lightness. Just to give it this little pink tone. Okay, that looks way better. So maybe I'll drop the opacity of this layer a little bit so it kind of blends in with the background. So yeah, it doesn't go over the top so much. Let's make a new one. Okay, we are starting to approach the last stage of my process of post-processing a render. So I think what I'm going to do at this point is to create some kind of vignetting effect for this, and I think the best way to do is to select all, then change the selection to border, and I'm going to go with 10 pixels, so it leaves me this 5 pixel border here. And then I'm going to blur it out way out there with Gaussian blur. Let's go crazy. Let's give it something like something like 800 or thereabout pixels. It depends on the size of the image, how far you have to go with it so to make it work. So now when I go back, I have this kind of selection, and I can turn that to layer mask. Just put the dot on the selection so that you're using the selection to create a layer mask, and there it is. I can also change the layer mask a little bit with the curves tool, so colors and curves, and let's see what the histogram looks like. Okay, so I think I can make the blacks really black and whites really white, and it would be okay. Maybe even a little less curve there. Oh yeah. Now we can use these blending modes again. Let's see what happens when we go through them with arrow keys. Okay. Okay, multiply looks good, but I already knew that it would. So let's go through all of them. Okay, this is interesting. Difference. That darkens out the corners pretty interestingly. Maybe I'll go with difference here. Okay, let's duplicate it and let's invert the layer mask by going colors and invert when the layer mask is selected. And now I can go from start again to change the center area to something interesting. Screen almost always works. exclusion. It makes it look like this is actually pretty interesting. So it looks like this weird combination of film negative and solarization or whatever the effects are, but it's pretty interesting. But I think I'm gonna go with the screen, so it brightens up the center of the image. And now I can mess with the layer masks using just regular brush. So maybe a little bit bigger brush, something like this. So I can bring the brightness to the face and maybe a little bit for the hair. I'm not going to worry about the legs too much. And same for the shadow version that creates the dark corners. I'm going to erase a little bit from the face and hair, so it doesn't go too dark here. Okay, and let's combine that to a new layer, so it pretty much merges everything below it to a new layer again, like this new from visible. That's pretty useful trick in Gimp. So, and now when we look at the histogram, you can see that it's changed a lot. There is a lot more stuff in the center. So if you use the layers the way I use them to kind of stack the brightness and darkness and value and contrast together with the layer below, and you have it on 32-bit floating point, the color space or this whatever you call this bit depth of the image, you will generate more information in the image, and that's kind of where I aim at. So it's perfectly fine to use PNG and 8-bit for your renders. You don't have to go crazy with HDRIs or OpenEXR or anything like that. Okay, the next phase is something that I call hiding the crimes. So I want to add here a little bit of film grain. And speaking of film grain, I think most of the time that I've seen that it's added to an image, there's just way too much of it. So here's my trick to create this very subtle grain or noise thing in the image. And let's create a new transparent layer called noise. I'm going to select a color that is pretty much mid-gray. It doesn't have to be perfect as long as it's somewhere there. And I'm going to bucket fill the entire layer. Then let's go to filters, noise, and let's use HSV noise. And there's a lot of little sliders here. Hue will change the color, same as saturation, so you can get this colorful noise if you want to, but I only want some value. So I'm going to crank it up to somewhere there, and let's make a new seed for it so we don't get the same results every time. And then it thinks about it for a moment when it generates it for the entire area. Okay, now we have this layer of noise everywhere, so we can now go to filters and blur and maybe give it this 1 pixel radius blur. So it looks something like this afterwards. And now maybe we can add a little bit more of this HSV noise. Maybe not as much as last time, so maybe a little bit less of the value. So it kind of fits this double noise effect that I want. And there it is, and then we just change the layer blending mode to overlay, and we can see that now there's this noise everywhere, and it's really annoyingly much. So let's just drop the layer opacity to somewhere like 25%, and it's you can notice it, but it's not disturbing. And maybe I can go even lower, something like maybe 15. Yeah, I think that is good. So you can barely see it, or you basically don't see it on skin or on hair or these fabrics, because there's already a lot of noise there. But the background, that is very noiseless and blank, it adds a little bit of that noise effect there. Maybe a little bit higher. Let's go 20% opacity. So yeah, that made something for the image. So this is something that I use quite a lot. If you look at my renders, there's always a little bit of that noisiness. Because at least iRay rendering it's really difficult to make it so that it doesn't come out a little bit noisy, at least at some parts of the image. So adding more of it in this very subtle and controlled way will kind of hide the crime and hide the fact that there is some of this rendering noise in the image. Yeah, what next? What next? Let's make another blank layer and call it super. And this time I'm gonna paint it black. And I'm going to use a filter from Light and Shadow called Supernova. And let's change the color to something like maybe in this case I'm gonna go with a little bit cyan. Okay, and let's bring the center point up there somewhere, and the radius, it can be pretty wild here. Number of spokes and random hue. Oh, maybe not that much, maybe a little bit less. Maybe I just go with the cyan and live with it. So okay. Now let's turn the blending mode to the screen. So yeah, we see what it does, and we can drop the opacity quite a lot. And then I think I can just boldly erase the center away from it. So let's go with brush this big and just destroy it from the center, because this is one of these layers that doesn't really matter, but it creates a little bit something in the background, and that's the goal of it. It's not meant to add too much anything in the actual. So I'm just going to erase it, so it only mostly affects in the background and creates a little bit of this effect there, maybe a little bit more, so you notice if you know it's there, but other than that you don't really see it. I think I can make another one called color, and And I'm going to use just normal brush with low opacity and maybe this big, and I'm gonna paint the hair area a little bit red and the background a little bit more blue maybe. Yeah, this is very crude method to do this, but as long as it works, nobody's going to care about it. So yeah, I could make a perfect mask for all of these color areas and make it very neat in the borders and edges, but I think that is beyond the scope of this this video. So yeah, there you can see that it kind of brings a little bit more color to the background, and I've already dropped the layer opacity to 50. Maybe I can go a little bit lower too, like it doesn't have to be insane to work well. Yeah. And okay, let's make a new from visible again. And let's try something else. If I go to colors and components and use mono mixer, that is an interesting tool to create black and white images. And how this works is that you have all the channels, red, green, and blue, and you can decide which channel you are going to use for the black and white version the most. And I think I want to go with something like this. Okay, maybe not going to negative, but maybe just a little bit from there. What about the green one? Let's crank it up and let's crank the blue one down. Oh yeah, but the blue one creates these beautiful shadows, so maybe I want to go with the blue channel. It's usually green or blue that works well here when there's normal skin tones in the image. Red channel tends to just brighten up and make everything this dull gray, so let's just take that pretty much away completely. The red channel. Yeah, something like that. Okay, and let's try to blend that on top of the image and see what it does. Very psychedelic. So let's see the grain merge again, and go back quite a lot and see what it actually does for the image. So it pumps up the contrast a little bit for the skin tones. I'm not sure if I like it. Maybe I'm going to drop it even more, maybe like 15%. Let's go with that. It's here I can see that these bright areas on the skin, they start to burn out a little bit, so that's maybe not something that I want to have here, but it's also not a big problem, I think. Let's create new from visible and let's bring our original up here and drop the opacity. So yeah, it's a fiddly thing. I could spend like 2-3 days with this, just trying out different things and and seeing what works and what doesn't. But I think for the purpose of this video, there's pretty much all the cool tricks that I know. Okay, the last thing I want to do is I've saved this this creation at its current state, so I want to flatten the image. And now I want to go back to 8-bit so I can save it as JPEG. And I go to Image, Precision, and 8-bit integer, and let's use Perceptual Gamma. And there are options here that what kind of dithering you can use, and I've been using Floyd Steinberg. I don't see a noticeable difference using any other of these. I don't understand this stuff, so if this works for me, so I'm using that. So I have no idea what those other ones do. So yeah, let's convert it, and there we have it. So now it's on 8-bit, and now we can save it as JPEG. So I think this is it for this video. So if you have questions, leave them below in the comment section, and I try to answer them whenever I can and whenever I remember that I have this funny YouTube channel. So don't get bored while waiting, but I will do my best to answer your questions or your comments. So have a good one.